Datos biográficos de Ugo. Es profesor de Química Física en la Universidad de Florencia, Italia, dentro del Departamento de Ciencias de la Tierra. Su interés se centra en la gestión de los recursos globales y en los recursos petroleros en particular, por medio de estudios socioeconómicos basados en la dinámica de sistemas. Trabaja también en el campo de las energías renovables, especialmente en tecnologías fotovoltaicas innovadoras. Es miembro del Club de Roma y muy activo en la divulgación de información sobre el cambio climático y agotamiento de recursos minerales en su blog, que ahora se llama Resource Crisis. Autor de 2 libros, Extracted, del cual nos va a hablar, también recientemente publicado, y de The Limits to Growth Revisited. Y ya os dejo con Hugo. Gracias.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry that I will not be speaking Castellano. I'm trying, but the results are not so great, and you have been sufficiently scared and upset in this meeting that you don't want me to scare you even more by trying to speak Spanish, because that would be a little bit difficult for me, but it's all right. So as David was saying, I changed a little bit my presentation title because so many things have been said during these 2 days, and I have to tell you something, gentlemen, and that is that I am an old big oiler. I'm hardened by experience. I'm tough and I can stand almost anything, but yesterday I was scared. I don't know about you, but I was scared. So I don't want to discuss any more fracking, please, because it has been sufficient for me. I think you all agree anyway, if you have endured the presentations of yesterday, that we have a little bit of a problem. A few problems, maybe, which in one way are summarized by the cover of my book, which the editor wanted to be very dark, red and black, with this enormous wheel, which looks like a Japanese robot trying to destroy the poor guy in the foreground. So it carries the message that we do have problems, many problems, climate change, depletion, minerals, and about climate change. I was supposed to speak about climate change, but I think I'm just giving you the message by taking off my jacket, and then it gives you the right message. I will discuss a little bit also climate change, but I thought maybe we can move a little bit farther from our problems of every day and try to see a little bit what is the future. What do we expect from a certain range of future? I mean, let's say at least a few years. So one of the problems that we have with this is that the economists don't understand the problem, as you may have understood this morning. The second problem, they reason with a time scale of a few months, few years at most. So let's try to discuss a little bit of a longer time scale, maybe decades, maybe centuries, or things like that. And what is the future? And in order to discuss the future, we must think about how we manage the future. And I brought with me this object. You remember last year I was toying with an apple. Those of you who were here today, to change, big change, a tennis ball. And a tennis ball has a lot to do with the future because I allow myself to make a little experiment with you. And would you help me with this experiment? Can you catch the ball? Okay, go. Throw it back. Okay. Not surprising, right? Now, but think about that a little bit. How does a human being manage to catch a ball? Not many animals can do this. Dogs, a little bit, but because you extrapolate the future. The trajectory of the balls is something that you can watch, and you must extrapolate because the signal that you can send to your hand to catch the ball is way too slow for you to catch the ball because you see where the ball is when you catch it. It's impossible. Your brain calculates the trajectory of the ball, extrapolates it, and you put your hand in the place where you calculated the ball should be. Normally it works. Not always, but it sort of works. So we have in our brain a circuitry which solves differential equations, because in order to extrapolate with the movement of the ball, you have to solve equations in your brain. Well, this time range, a few seconds, is even shorter than that of economists. So we need anyway to think about that. And there are some mechanisms. You see, there are a few creatures in the world, in the planet, which can do this because of evolutionary forces. That's me with the apple last year in Barbastro. And drones have a specialized chip which solves differential equations in real time so that a quadcopter drone can fly. Sea lions do that too. I don't know what is the evolutionary reason that makes sea lions able to balance a ball. Maybe, Antonio, you know about that. It's a part of your field of study with marine science, but I don't. So the question is that the problem is all in our brain. All in our brain. Our brains can do some things, but not everything. So you see, we have a lot of specialized circuitry in our brain. One recent discovery, relatively recent, is the presence. You have a system, a mirror neuron system, which is there for the purpose of predicting your behavior. You are mirroring the person in front of you, which is something that we share with monkeys and with economists too. We can predict within limits the behavior of the people in front of me by using this specialized circuitry. So I'm watching you. Don't think I'm not watching. And it's evolutionary. It is very important because I need to know if you want to listen to me or if you want to kill me. I mean, in doing this job of presenting these kind of things, you have to develop your mirror neurons tend to mirror all of you and understand what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. Don't think you can. So we have this circuitry. The problem is this is also a very short-range circuitry. It's about the same as catching the ball, I think, but it's not very long-range. So if we want to go into the far future, tens of years, and we need to develop some kind of differential engines, methods which we don't have in our brain. Even if we are not economists, even the people who are here, it's difficult for us to use to make this calculation over a time range of a century. So in order to do that, the way it was done in 1972 for the limits to growth study, it was done by developing a specific differential engine, an engine to solve differential engines, which would not solve them in real time, of course, but would solve the equation and predict a trajectory for the world system, and which was a little bit more complicated than a ball or things like that, but it's still the same principle. You develop a question, you extrapolate, you think of the future follows the trajectories, and you can more or less prepare for the future. So I thought I would spend a little time trying to explain to you how this works, and I'm sorry that for many of you it's probably well known, but maybe you are not all experts in system dynamics. So let me tell you something about system dynamics. System dynamics comes in different shapes. The basic paradigm of system dynamics is the Bathory model. System dynamics describes stocks and flows. You have something like a stock and a flow. So let me show you again the basic mechanism of system dynamics. You have a stock of water, a reservoir which is empty at present. You have a flow of water into this stock. Now this stock is a little bit more full than before, and this one is a little bit more empty. Notice one thing, that you can do this because you work in a thermodynamic potential, a gravitational potential, more exactly. So water flows down, at least on this planet. So Alicia this morning was saying, having a beautiful description of the power of thermodynamics and in general power of physics. So all system dynamics has to do with things which are driven by thermodynamic potential or by physical potential if you prefer, but everything is thermodynamic really. So you can describe something by saying that you have a potential, something which has a thermodynamic potential moves to something which has a lower thermodynamic potential, which is the same thing as the ball. The ball, if I raise its potential energy, which the more I raise it, the more I raise it. And when I let it go, then the potential energy, gravitational, becomes kinetic energy. So even here you have the transfer of energy from one reservoir, from one stock to another. Although they're not physical stock, you have to think of the ball here as holding some potential, here's lower potential. So you can make a model just to show you how you can do this. The model of a falling object, which is rather simple. You have a stock for the potential energy, a stock for the kinetic energy. And in this case, I took into account the aerodynamic drag, which for the ball is not very important. You should have it fall from very large heights in order to slow it down by aerodynamic drag, but it's the way that a parachute works. If it was not, some moment it reached a constant speed, a constant kinetic energy, because otherwise it would not work as a parachute. So you see, we have these software systems which can allow you to do this with a minimal understanding of the equation. You don't need to solve the equation yourself. You have to set the system in such a way that it will have the right equations and will solve them right. But you don't have to worry about that as long as you have a visual of what you want to do. So then this is, of course, simple, but you can move on. You enjoy yourself to make all kinds of models, like a truck model. This is, I call it a truck named Vensim, because Vensim is the name of one of the software. So this is the free one, you have more sophisticated ones. So also the truck is a system which accumulates energy into the fuel, transforms this energy into speed, but then drags aerodynamic, and otherwise they slow down the truck. And this is very obvious for all of you. It's not difficult to understand that a truck cannot accelerate to infinity. And so it works. So it's you can move it to perhaps more interesting systems. You have all sorts of systems which are slowed down by physical factors. In nature, there is very little that can grow forever. So this model, for instance, is the stock of energy of the Earth, which gains energy from the sun, loses energy through radiation into space, and since you have a rate of dispersal, that can be affected by the concentration of greenhouse gases. This is probably obvious for all of you, but in the debate, it is not at all obvious. People will keep telling you, oh, CO2 is nothing. You have only 400 parts per million of CO2. How can that affect the temperature of the Earth? And I have several answers. If you want to know, I tell the story of when I had a big motorcycle. Sometime I had, very nice. And the motorcycle was probably 300 kilograms, plus me makes almost 400 kilograms. And I was going happily through a winding road, and then I saw a black spot on the ground. So well, maybe that's oil. And a 300 kilogram motorcycle can be sent flying, literally, by 10 grams of oil. So you see the system can be easily triggered. But this system, at least, tends to stabilize, which doesn't mean that it could not kill all of us. Depends where you want to stabilize. But the interesting point of these systems is that there are some systems which are inherently unstable. And that's the interesting part. This is more on an economics model. If you have studied economy, you see that everything should go to a sort of equilibrium, homeostatic equilibrium, prices adapt in such a way to optimize the exploitation of the production or whatever you are marketing. So this is one note. But some system tends to go up and down. Let me make you an example. It's a very old example. Biologists will recognize what I'm talking about. But suppose you're a fox. Suppose some of you are rabbits. Some of you foxes, some of you rabbits. Now, foxes should chase rabbits. Don't do that right now because it would be a mess. But the idea is that you can describe the system of rabbits and foxes in terms of energy stocks. Because a fox is a stock of energy, metabolic, biologic energy. A rabbit is a stock of energy, protein energy. So a fox is a system which transforms rabbits into foxes by chasing them. That's just like the economy. The economy transforms mineral resources into parts of the economy. So the point is, what is the limit of this system? And that's an interesting point because we don't seem to have the machinery inside here to solve these equations. It took a lot of time for people to understand that there was a problem. And the problem was that, see, I can make you this example. We still don't know how to solve this problem. But you have this problem. If you have a parachute, the faster it goes, the more drag there is, so it is stabilized by the atmospheric drag. If you kill too many rabbits, then you have less and less rabbits. So the situation worsens all the time. Your limit is a moving target, and you can never reach it. You can never stabilize the system. Assuming that a fox is intelligent enough to use a gun, then it would probably be stupid enough to kill too many rabbits, which incidentally tells you that having a gun doesn't mean that you're especially smart, but that's another story. Anyway, this is the equivalent of the story of drill, baby, drill, because you don't realize that the faster you drill, the faster you kill rabbits, the faster you deplete your resource, the faster you run out of rabbits. So the rabbit-foxes system is a very interesting system. The first real dynamic system in the sense that it does not stabilize. You can make it stabilize, but it doesn't by itself. In its simplest form, it does not stabilize. So it's a system in which you have two stocks. One is the energy of foxes, one is the energy of rabbits. You go like this, thing, up and down, up and down. And then you see how you can make a very simple model here, foxes and rabbits, which are two stocks of energy, and you can solve it. You can have your system solved it. The first one who solved this system was the mathematician Vito Volterra and his colleague, American colleague, Locke. And they got this up and down, this thing, which is a fundamental point. Some systems do not stabilize by themselves. You have to stabilize them. And so that's the real problem we have. Incidentally, if you want to see the equations, here are the equations. Not difficult, but it takes some work to solve them. There is no analytical solution to this problem. So you can move them a little bit, and what you have is that you can assume that the rabbits do not reproduce. So in that case, you have the exploitation, a model of the exploitation of a mineral resource, which is not renewable. It's not so different. The equations are more or less the same, but as you may imagine, you have only one curve, one peak, because then rabbits are gone forever. And this model is rather simple, but it's extremely powerful because you can use it. You can fit reality. And this is the basic point of the Hubbard curve that you heard so much about. The ultimate origin of the Hubbard curve is this behavior. Qualitatively, you can understand it that the more resources I have, the more I grow. The economy grows because it has resources, but the more it grows, the more it exploits resources, and eventually it has to go down. And it looks like some people do have this kind of differential engine inside their heads. This is William Stanley Jevons, you know the story probably of the core question. And he said he had thought already in 1866. He had it clear. He had a different brain than most of us because he could understand, look, there is a problem with core question. There is a problem with core. Okay, we have plenty of core. 1866, you see, when he wrote, they were very far from the peak. But he recognized the more coal we extract, the bigger our economy gets. And the bigger our economy, the more coal we need to extract. And coal is just a finite amount, and the more you extract it, the more difficult it becomes. So that, you see, it doesn't need equations. It didn't have software, it didn't have computers, it didn't probably know how to solve a differential equation. I don't know, but he had this idea. So, see, once you have this, you have a very powerful intellectual tool that tells you a lot of things about your system, because the system will go up and then down. That's very simple, but it's a feature of many systems. You have plenty of examples. I could spend 1 hour showing to you examples of overexploitation of resources which are mineral or even biological. It doesn't matter if whales can reproduce. If you kill too many whales, then you will destroy them, even though theoretically they could reproduce. So this is, I think, one of the most interesting cases of the overexploitation of a mineral resource, because it tells you so much of how people's minds work. I mean, you could tell to these people, the whales of mid-19th century, but don't you realize, guys, that you're killing off the whales? And they would tell you, don't bother us, you asshole. Because you can see that in the literature of the time. You can read Moby Dick. Have you read Moby Dick? There is a chapter exactly on this subject. Are we running out of whales? And even Herman Melville, not a stupid person, he could not see that. He didn't realize it was impossible for Herman Melville to understand that the whole struggle of Captain Ahab with harpoon and the whales, it was due to the fact that we were running out of whales. Very simple. But even with the bison, the bison in the plains, American plains, you could see that they were disappearing, but people kept shooting at them until they were exterminated, which again shows that having a gun doesn't make you especially smart, but this is another story. Anyway, these kind of whales were not completely exterminated, but at the end of the century, biologists estimate that there were something like 50 individuals left. So you can see that it was a complete destruction of the resource that people were exploiting for their living. So how can you do this mistake? It is because you don't have the right circuitry in your head. And that creates a lot of problem. But this is an interpretation, okay, past history. We know how it works. Now, can we extrapolate? I don't know, but I can show you this. It's always very risky to extrapolate. But this is something that we wrote in 2006 with Leigh Exley, a geologist. And we made this calculation using that simple model. And we got the peak for the total world energy production in 2014, which may be right, may be wrong. But from what I heard yesterday, I have this horrible feeling that it may be right, or at least not so wrong. Anyway, in 3 years, at the next conference in Barbastro, we get back here and we see how this prediction worked. But the problem is not, you see, it's not so much making an exact prediction, which is usually impossible and not even useful. What you do when you predict this thing, you have to understand the system and try to move with the system, try to understand the movements of the system, what is the system doing, and trying to see if you can control the system a little bit. But that's the problem. Oh, now I have something about climate change. There is no climate change here. It could do things worse. Climate change, you can add another stuff, which is pollution. The model is rather simple, but I will not go into many details. Just to tell you that when you add pollution, things get worse, as you could expect, because you have another negative factor. So you have energy which goes into the economy, and the economy produces pollution. This is what I use the term sometimes, two faces of the same coin, because the more you grow the economy, not only you deplete faster, but also you produce more pollution. And that's a drag for the economy, because the economy, you need to somehow to fight pollution. If you don't fight pollution, it is worse, because the damage is worse. So we have this these models can be done. You can play with that, but let me not go into too many details. For instance, you could model the methane hydrate bomb, which you probably heard about. Did you hear about the methane hydrate bomb? So if it explodes, this is of course just a qualitative model, but the economy just goes to zero, bang, because you have such a disaster that you cannot do any control. But you can play with these models. It's a lot of fun, and the idea is not to predict anything. Prediction is you end up with the spaghetti models. Spaghetti models is fun, but they're useless. You need simple models to understand what are the forces which move the machine. Then if you understand what moves the machine, you don't need models anymore, like Jevons. Jevons, he didn't have models, but he understood how the economic machine works, how the relation between resources and the economy is. If you understand that, you are sort of prepared to what is going to happen, although sometimes it happens so fast that even in that case you may not be prepared. So many things. So you can go more, you can make more complicated model with 6, but the basis is this. You have always this going down, or the thermodynamic potentials. What you do with the limits to growth is you consider more than just one stock or two. You consider 6 or 5, depending how you want to see this. But in this case, the situation is a little bit different, because as the system has more degrees of freedom, then it can move in different directions. You don't have just, if you have a ball falling in a gravitational potential, it can only go down and reach the ground at some moment. But in this case, you have several paths for the dissipation of the thermodynamic potential. And here I'm showing to you two of the main results from the 2004 edition of this book, which shows that we can collapse. You see this, the industrial output, food, and population collapsing because of depletion. Depletion can cause the economy to collapse because the economy is unstable. You have this factor, and as Alicia told us this morning, the situation in this case is, in the long run, is very difficult. Or you can have climate change triggering collapse. In such case, you have such a climatic disaster that you don't have any more time or resources to think about extracting minerals. So you leave the minerals in the ground because you have to fight hurricanes and sea levels rising and tsunamis and what you had. In this case, some mineral resources will be left for the future generation in 100,000 years. In a sense, it is good. But anyway, I think we all agree at this point that the situation is sort of bad. We have a problem. And it can be a very bad problem. I mean, if this thing goes down, and it goes down fast, and that means seriously that the economy collapses, people die, and it's a real disaster. I mean, I remember when I started in this field with peak oil back in 2001, we found this new concept of peak oil. It was great fun. Okay, this is fantastic. We make models, so we make calculations. But it was still something in the future. We thought, well, some people were saying 2005, 2008, 2011, but still, you had years. I have this horrible feeling, I don't know about you, that we are very close to this new phase, and that hurts so a little bit. So I thought I could spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes to discuss with you some ideas that I have on how we could manage this situation in such a way to avoid at least the worst. So how do we do this? Well, I'm not the first thinking about that. When you start thinking about peak oil, you start thinking about ways to avoid peak oil. You may be an expert in something that you don't like if you are an undertaker, for instance, you do not necessarily like the object of your job. And so already in 1956, Hubbard himself, he thought of this because he was thinking about that. And I think, seeing back about more than half a century after, I think you agree with me, this was a little bit optimistic. In this scenario, there would be the initial idea that peak oilers had. People dealing with peak oil, we had this naive idea that, we study the subject, we tell it to our political leaders, then our political leaders will do something about that. Can you believe that? We were thinking that, really. And so there is two problems here. First of all, nuclear energy is not efficient enough to adapt. And then you have to think, why do you have this? I mean, what forces bring you up like this and then flat? Why? But it's something that people working with these scenarios, with these models, have been asking themselves. So this is again the limits to growth. So let's try to rig the model in such a way that we avoid collapse. Is it possible? It is possible. You can do this because it is a model. You just type in the numbers you want. It's not difficult. First you find that technology doesn't help at all. Technology is a negative factor, destroys everything. You don't want high technology. It worsens things considerably. But then you start thinking, okay, let's suppose I want to avoid collapse, or I want the economy to stabilize. And so I start thinking I must keep industrial production under control, avoid too much, going to up too much. I want to avoid overpopulation, so I must control births. I have to allocate a certain amount of resources to fighting pollution. And so you do this, and you can do this. You can come up with a scenario where the main elements of the model of the world system stabilize. There is a little bit of a problem here, however. What is the actuator? How do you do this in practice? What happens in practice? That when they come up with these ideas, they say, you want to start a world dictatorship, you're an Nazi, you want to destroy humankind, you're an alien, a reptilian, or something like that. But the problem is there, but a bit exaggerated. But you cannot say, like, we reduce or we cap industrial production. How do you do that exactly? It's not clear that there are ways of doing that, and if it goes against all what we know of the science of control systems. The people working with control system, dynamic control system, know that it's not possible to do like this, go up and then stabilize all of a sudden. You always go through oscillation in practice, in the real life. All the control systems do this if they work. If they don't work, you have the case B. You can have that. You can go out of once you start playing with these models, you can introduce control systems, and you see that you can stabilize the system, or if you don't do it right, the system goes off completely. It can happen. So, let's see if I can tell you something about this subject, because it's also a very fascinating subject, which has a lot to do with system dynamics. And the origin of all this was this object that those of you who are engineers will recognize it immediately. If you don't, this object, which looks like an alien just landed from outer space, it's a control system for steam engines, which is called a governor. And I don't remember, I think it was Lord Kelvin who said that science owes much more to the steam machine, got much more from the steam machine than the steam machine got from science, because this was a very interesting thing, very clever, a completely mechanical system which regulates the steam engine by regulating the input valve of the steam into the engine. And that was a revolution for those times, a real revolutionary technology, because you don't have to do it anymore by hand. You set the system, and there you go. There your steam engine will go and regulate itself and stabilize to some level. It was really a revolution, just that James Clerk Maxwell wrote an entire paper on this object by about 30 pages of differential equations. If you would like to read it, it's available. You can enjoy a weekend going through these equations. But you see, that machine, in a way, solves by itself 30 pages of differential equations. So he gave origin to the term cybernetics. That we don't use it anymore in its original sense. It's a bit out of fashion now, but we still speak of cyberspace, which comes from this old machinery. And we have this idea, so that it is possible to control systems. And it is possible to control them automatically. How does it work? The governor. It works like this. You can make a model. This is the governor. It's a steam engine. This is the governor. In a way, the governor mirrors the steam engine because the governor is a stock of energy. It's kinetic energy because it turns around. So you can describe the system by a very simple model. There are other ways to do it. You can make it more complicated, but the trick is that you model your system. You have a system, you model it, and you use the model of the system in order to control the system. And this is possible for steam engines, or all kinds of things like drones, or like all sorts of machinery. Plenty of things are based on sophisticated control systems which have the purpose of solving differential equations, and they do it. The question is whether you can do it on the world system, which I try to do just for fun. I don't think that it is anything more than just a test. But I showed to you the world system before, and you see that the system has solutions in which the economy crashes completely to zero. Now, in the same model, you add a government or a governor, something that smooths down the system, slows it down, and then you have a possibility of stabilizing it. Notice that I'm not saying that the government or governor is doing anything intelligent. In this case, it is just slowing down growth when the system grows, pushing growth up a little when the system falls. So we should not necessarily ask to the government to do things very smart. It is enough to stabilize a little bit the system, which is possibly more realistic. Even we are not able to do even that, but just in case the results of this model, just for your curiosity, right now we are in a condition of fossil overshoot that we cannot possibly avoid it. We cannot avoid the crash. It's impossible. Correctly, it was said several times by Pedro, by others, that there is no way that renewables or anything else can keep us where we are. We are going to go down, absolutely. There's no way that we can avoid that. But if you play with this model, you see that the crash can be slowed down, slow it down a little bit, can be reduced, can be smoothed a little bit. If you are willing to slow down, you don't push the system all the way up to the limit. You slow it down yourself a little bit, and then you follow it as it falls. Then maybe you could have, perhaps, in the future, a renewable overshoot. I don't know, I should put a question mark there because it's not at all obvious. But you could, it is possible that in some future society you would go in overshoot with renewables, absolutely, but down not to the level we got with the fossils. So eventually the system stabilized to something that I call a sustainable metabolic level. What do I mean with that? I mean that the metabolism, as you know, is any system, typically biological, which absorbs energy, typically from the sun, metabolizes, transforms into a different stock of energy, which is usually itself. We are metabolic systems. We have stocks of energy, which we get from plants, which in turn get it from the sun. So a metabolic system can be stable for a very long time. Plants have been around on this planet, land plants, at least 350 million of years. So it is possible to make a sustainable metabolic level. Now, for humankind, we have to see what we mean as metabolic level. Is this an industrial level? Is this an agricultural level? Hunting and gathering level? Or what do you think? I think it is possible to maintain a certain degree, absolutely. There will be, if you don't collapse completely, which could happen, but this is something that we cannot really solve as a problem. But if we slow down the growth, then we can arrive to a sort of stable system, which may be stable. In my opinion, it is also possible to maintain a certain industrial activity, even rather sophisticated, depending on what we can do, depending on what kind of technologies we have, depending on the net energy of the system. As Alicia was correctly saying this morning, there is no way that we can keep the industrial system running as it is now by exploiting resources which cannot be replaced. So it means that we have to rethink completely the industrial system, transforming it into something that probably we would not even recognize as an industrial system, but a system which can close the circle by using resources which are not so rare as to be impossible to manage. And so I think planet, talking about Thanatia, it's a different planet, not necessarily a dead planet, though it may be. Hope not. Thanatia is a bit worrisome. Alicia, you did your best to scare me a little bit more this morning. I told you. But it's a different planet, a planet in which we have to learn how to live. And I think I could say something about that. If you play with these models, you find that I can propose these as ideas to you. But I mean, are you economists? And many of you are economists. Because for economists it is very difficult to propose these kind of things. But if you are here, maybe you could understand the fact that if we want to survive, just survive in some form, we don't have to push growth as the government is doing. We need a government which does exactly the opposite of what the governments are doing right now. Not stimulating growth, but damping growth, not to over-exploit resources, because the whole story now, we keep production at levels as high as possible, we keep growing, but then you run out of resources faster, so you have to slow down resource depletion. And one important few things which are not often said is that you don't have to be so efficient. The more efficient you are, the faster you send the system out of balance. It's like killing rabbits for a fox, killing rabbits with a gun. Very efficient, but not the way of being a good fox. So I was discussing that yesterday with Juan Del Rio, who is, where is Juan? I don't know, he said, yeah, you're perfectly right, he told me. We need to be less efficient and more resilient. It's a fundamental point. I think I propose it to you because there is no way to prove that this is in a scientific way, this is the way to go. I cannot tell you that it is. I can only tell you I played a lot with these models, and what I get out of these models is this. And you can try that yourselves. And it's a very interesting point. You see, even we are so much in love with technology that we think that technology will solve all problems. Well, it is not the case. Absolutely not. See this guy, Philippe Buit, he's a French guy with a name which cannot be pronounced, I'm sorry, but he's one of the co-authors of my book, the book Extracted, and he wrote this book, which is fantastic. I suggest you to read it if you can read French, because it makes a detailed criticism of our present technology. Alicia, you should read it, because it says many things that you mentioned in your talk. From him, yeah.
Yes, this morning.
Excellent. Oh, he's a very smart guy. Fantastic. Unfortunately, I can only write in French, not in English, not in, I don't know, maybe he can speak Spanish, maybe. But this is a fundamental point. You see, we are so much in love with this kind of thing that we go from this to this to this. This is a LED lamp. Now, we like these things without realizing that this is probably sustainable because it's only glass, metal, tungsten. It can be recycled. There's gallium in this. As Alicia was saying, how do you recycle gallium? World production is only 450 tons per year. What kind of machinery you have to put together in order to recycle gallium? I think we're going in the wrong direction. Right? So I propose this to you. I don't say that it is necessarily right, but you arrive to the point that we discover that our government is doing exactly the opposite of what it should be doing. So at this point, I don't know what exactly we should do to convince the government to change completely in the turnaround. How do we manage the commons? I prepared this slide, and this is just out of curiosity. Maybe we can discuss that. But the left, in quotes, seems to think that if we bicycle, we give a good example, and we can influence the system from the bottom up. I show the example. We collect together at making this meeting, and so we are so smart and so good that the government will listen to us, maybe. Or maybe they will send the tanks against us. I'm not so sure. But I think neither strategy works, because you cannot manage a system with force. That's another point that it's clear from these systems, from these models you get. So I don't have a solution, but I just wanted maybe to discuss with you. We have maybe 15 minutes, and one thing that we might discuss is that there is this idea now that maybe we should shrink the size of states. Smaller states are easier to manage, and then if a small state has some mineral resource, then maybe they manage it better because it is within the state. You don't want to destroy it. That's the idea, right? There is a little problem with this, which I thought I could show to you. It is that when you have small states, you have a little of a military problem. I can tell you from the history of Italy, and I can tell you that from what I know, when Italy was subdivided, those small states, they were much better managed than Italy is managed now by the central government. Yet, we were invaded by the Spaniards and conquered. So one of the reasons why there is an Italy now as a state is because we were afraid of the Spanish. And now not anymore so much, but still. So we may go back to that, but I'm not so sure about that. So you see a lot of problems, and I just finished with this. As people say, I cannot solve problems, but I can admire them. And so maybe we can discuss a bit about that. Just mentioning that the Club of Rome, which has been sponsoring nicely my research for a while, they had this idea over the past about 50 years. They've been trying to do what I've been discussing, influence governments to do the things more or less that I mentioned without much success. So, gentlemen and ladies, this is what I can say, and if you like to discuss that, maybe we can think of something better.
Thank you, Ugo. It's time for questions.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Antonio.
How are you doing?
I'm fine. How about you?
So, there are many things that I have been suggested by your very attractive talk. And there is something that I have realized during all this Congress. It seems that all of us, because some of the presenters here were already 3 years ago, and it seems that we have all together moved to more classistic positions, all of us. So it seems that what was a great deal of optimism, or still some degree of optimism, in fact I didn't share, 3 years ago, has been fading quite rapidly as time progresses. Just another thing I want to point out regarding the invasion of Italy. In fact, it was not exactly the Spanish by the Catalan who invaded Italy.
Okay.
But nevertheless, this is not the question. So for me, the point is... Well, in fact, not Catalonia, not exactly Catalonia, but Catalonia and Aragon. So we here are the invaders, in some sense. Okay, no, but my question, well, you were saying, okay, it seems clear that we are not able to avoid some degree of collapse. My feeling, and I'm not sure you've shared this with me, but I think it's more or less something that we are thinking without explicitly expressing, is that the degree of collapse depends a lot on the amount of overshoot we are going to incur. So it seems quite clear that we have not only the urgency to act to avoid collapse or to prepare for the state before collapse, but to stop as fast as possible our present level of overshoot. Because if we are going very, 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 very high in this oscillation, we are going also to go very, very, very deep when it falls away. So well, you're saying you agree, okay. But the point is how? How can we avoid running even more in this overshooting situation? What do you think?
It's the question that I said I admire, but I cannot answer. It is possibly it is too late to do anything, because if we are at the peak, then we have reached the maximum level of overshoot that we will ever reach. So in that case, we can only go down and hope that that will not be so hard as we may imagine it to be. But maybe there is still space to do that. I think if we had to prepare to dampen a little bit a collapse, the collapse, we can build infrastructures which would help us to keep going at least at a certain level, like trying to renew agriculture in such a way not to make so destructive to the land, building up some renewable energy which will not solve all the problems, but can dampen a little, smooth a little bit the situation, and maybe try to convince people that there is a way to go and a way not to go. It is difficult because the people of the Club of Rome have been trying to do that for 40 years without success. So I'm a little bit skeptical, or maybe disappointed, or maybe sorry about that. But maybe it can still be done. I don't know.
Well, my final point, if you allow me, is that I think that we have a tendency to talk about our personal engagement in doing things, in changing things. So we are thinking rather about individual actions, but maybe we should try to do something less individual and more collective, and even trying to influence at a higher political level, because it seems that from the bottom it's going to be very hard.
That's a point that I wanted to stress, that alone we cannot do anything. You can bicycle to work, but the gasoline that you save will be used by someone else to power his or her SUV. So we need a government, essentially. I don't know which level, but it has to do at the societal level. Otherwise, we don't go anywhere.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
Oh, hay muchas. Arriba primero.
Hello, thank you very much. One of the things I feel is that it's not that easy to learn about peak oil and about all this reality, that it is not so far away. And maybe the governments and the elites, they know, and they are doing exactly the opposite of what it should be done. But my question is, do the teachers in the school know about this? Shouldn't we teach the young guys who are going to suffer it? Because maybe for us, we are almost, I don't know how to say, but we are on the zenith or on the peak, and we lived all the high up, but our kids are going to live the way down, the bumpy road. So are we doing anything in that direction?
It's a good question. I can tell you, I asked the same question to Jürgen Randers, who was one of the authors of the original Limits to Growth study, and he says that he has been teaching, not to kids, but to grown-up people doing business school and things like that for about 40 years about these principles. And then after 40 years, he is dismayed to discover that they learn these things, then they go to work in business and they do exactly the same mistakes that people who are not taught that do. So my personal impression is that teaching to kids or teaching to even young adults, which I do, I teach these kind of things at the university level, but honestly I have this horrible feeling that my impact is zero. I don't know if some of you have this same experience.
Sí, como entiendes español.
Sí, un poco, yo entiendo.
Bueno, decir que estoy encantado de la conferencia.
Gracias.
Porque he visto reunidas distintos elementos que a mí me parecen claves. Yo creo que hay un gap de conocimiento básicamente de la sociedad presente. Sí. Es la dinámica de sistemas y la termodinámica. Hay que encontrar maneras. Bueno, tu última frase ha sido un poco dolorosa, ¿no? En el sentido de que si aún la enseñas, pero en fin, a mí me la enseñaron y creo que la aplico, es decir, todo está perdido, ¿no? Bueno, también me ha gustado mucho estos mind models, ¿verdad? Son maneras, imagino que has ido refinando para llevar los mensajes de cómo funciona la dinámica de sistemas, estos comportamientos antiintuitivos. Entonces quería hacer dos preguntas más concretas, referentes a los límites del crecimiento. Tú hiciste una revisión hace poco y sacaste la conclusión de que el escenario que se está realizando era el de overshoot and collapse y que la respuesta es la que se está produciendo, porque mediante la econometría has visto pues que la respuesta es la que habían previsto las ecuaciones diferenciales originales y además con muy poca incertidumbre. Solamente en el caso del CO2, si lo tengo bien entendido, ellos creían que habría más CO2 que el que en realidad hay. Ya me confirmarás la respuesta, si está bien o cierto o no. Hay ahora una revisión de Graham Turner del Melbourne Institute, que ha hecho también una actualización y bueno, llega más o menos a la misma conclusión. Claro, uno dice, los modelos de dinámica de sistemas no sirven para hacer predicciones, pero sí para comprender el funcionamiento. Bueno, yo no sé si esto es demasiado modesto, es, digamos, una prudencia científica, porque, en fin, en los modelos físicos sí sirven para hacer predicciones. Pues si no, un freno ABS no frenaría, ¿no? Una servodirección no giraría. Es decir, en la medida en que uno llegue a un detalle suficiente del top-down modeling, bueno, en los límites del crecimiento es un modelo que es un modelo de ingeniería, entiendo yo. Básicamente, no es un modelo económico, es ingeniería pura, ¿no? Bueno, este modelo, este escenario nos dice que el collapse empieza, no lo dicen en el texto, pero en las gráficas sí, empieza en el 2015, o sea, mañana, 2015. El 2015 empieza a disminuir la producción por habitante y en el 2030 empieza a disminuir la población a razón de 500 millones de personas por década. Dice esto. Primera pregunta es, primera pregunta, ¿hasta qué punto, digamos, estás de acuerdo con este panorama que acabo de pintar? Y relacionado, pero segunda pregunta, es ¿qué ha hecho Randers para ahora hacer un modelo distinto que resulta que no es el año que viene, sino que es dentro de 30 años, o yo no sé cuándo? O sea, ¿qué le ha pasado a Randers? ¿O quién le ha pagado? ¿O qué? No sé, ¿no? Bueno, no, pero claro, también lo han cargado el Club de Roma.
First question, I think the first question was whether you... no, I lost track.
What extent the scenarios and the provisions of the...
sorry, I was thinking to Jürgen and the story of Jürgen, but the story... there have been several revisions, you were mentioning that too, but so far the prediction, the real world has been following rather nicely one of the 12 models, 12 scenarios. presented in the original book. So it's a good success in this sense, because prediction over 50 years, 40 years actually, it's very difficult to do that. But there's a basic point that you mentioned, that what is a model for? Is it for prediction, or is it for understanding? It is within limits. You're perfectly right, because that it is for prediction as well. You cannot avoid that, because if the model has a physical basis, thermodynamic basis, then it predicts. It is very difficult to predict when some events will occur, but it is possible to predict some shape, and within some limits. There has been so much debate about the limits to growth that the people writing it were a little bit defensive. On the defensive, they said, no, we're not predicting anything, but really they were predicting. And this prediction is turning out, I think, impressively correct. I mean, the collapse may come in 2020, maybe they said 2015, but could be 2025. But the idea is there. What we're seeing happening in the world is following so well the basic elements of the model that you cannot miss that. Then the model is as good as you can use it to act on the system. If you don't act on the system, the model is useless, no matter how good it is. So about Randers, it's a good question. I know Randers. He has been so nice to write the prefaction of my book. He says he's an old Norwegian gentleman, and then he wanted to make a projection of his own for the future. So he decided to sit down, and he did it. And actually, I think he financed this work with his own money, because he wanted to do that. But I can tell you that there is some discrepancy in Randers' approach and the limits to growth approach, and the other authors did not agree so much with Randers' approach. But anyway, it's a model that again can be useful or not, but is up to you to act on the model. So the book by Randers, you may have heard of it, 2052. It's an interesting book to read, but my impression is that it may become obsolete very soon, because it is a single prediction, a single scenario. So this will be the future. That's okay. I mean, we are all moving toward the future, and we try to avoid the worst dangers of it.
Questions pending, so be brief, please. Sí, ahí.
Hola, buenas tardes. He estado, cada vez que hay un expositor usando, cada exposición como si fuera una baldosa. Y cuando armo el tapiz, está la parte de energía, está la parte de lo que es materiales, pero no está la parte que hoy lo tocaste, que es la técnica, y es intentar, devolver hacia atrás, con lo que decís, yendo la tecnología a un nivel de eficiencia. Estamos gastando materiales y tierras raras que provocaría, todavía más rápido el agotamiento de recursos, y no sé por qué no se entiende, que la bicicleta también necesita de recursos, y se plantea como si fuera a lo mejor pasar del automóvil, porque solamente se ve la cuestión energética como transporte o como una cuestión simple, de energía, y no se tiene en cuenta que también se necesita energía para poder transportar fluidos, para poder hacer hasta lo más mínimo, que es el piñón de la bicicleta, que si no tenemos la aleación que va dentro del piñón, no podemos mover la bicicleta. Y así, no se ve que la parte de la técnica no está dentro de la discusión. Y hay que transportar fluidos, hay que transportar la misma energía, hay que hacer rutas, carreteras, está el pico del cemento también. Estoy en Valencia y yo, dentro de la construcción, ya no he encontrado, por ejemplo, el mármol Macael, el blanco Macael, ya no existe. Y así como no existe la piedra y el mármol, el cemento, también el clinker necesita una gran cantidad de energía para poder fabricar cemento. Y si no tenemos la primera baldosa, que era lo que habló Antonio, después cuando viene Prieto y con el tema de los materiales y todo lo demás, y la técnica no se habla, como si es parte que van a ser pequeños colapsos cuando no encontremos ni siquiera para poder fabricar una llave de paso. Quería saber cómo lo ves en el conjunto.
What is the question? I'm sorry. Pick everything. Yeah, but I think I understand that you like bicycles, first of all, right? But bicycle, no, you don't. You say that everything will peak, even bicycles. Yes. Oh, that's a good point. I respectfully disagree, because if we can slow down and use low technologies, then we don't really need to abandon everything and go back to Stone Age. Yamani said oil age did not finish because, no, the Stone Age did not finish because we ran out of stones. But everybody says this sentence. I'm not sure whether it means anything, but it sounds funny. Anyway, the point is, if you are basically right, what you say, there will be a sort of, we need energy for everything. If we don't have energy, if we run out of all sources of energy which are not firewood, then we cannot even have bicycles. Bicycles need steel. In order to have steel, you need energy. And you can make steel. You don't necessarily need coal to make steel, but you need a lot of energy to smelt iron minerals, transform them into steel, and make a bicycle. So the point, I think, we need to maintain some degree of metabolic energy if we want to keep even bicycles, even low technologies like tungsten filament lamps. We need energy to run a tungsten filament lamp. Not so much minerals as a LED lamp, but we need some energy. So if we completely run out of energy, then we go back to agriculture. It's not a problem. So pick everything in its strong form. We will see what happens.
Yeah, but and then Gail, you had also another one, right? Yeah. Okay. Viv, please. Trata de.
Muchas gracias primero por la conferencia que has dado. Estuve hace unos años en una conferencia en Valladolid que estuvo Pedro Prieto y también Richard Hemberg, y le pregunté, también él hablaba del tema del peak everything y del colapso, entonces le pregunté cuál era su consejo y dijo que aprendiéramos a cultivar nuestra propia comida tan pronto como sea posible. Y entonces quería también preguntarte a ti sobre esta idea y sobre por qué no se pone mucho énfasis en el tema energético, pero se habla muy poco del tema de la alimentación, tanto lo que es distribución de la alimentación como producción de la alimentación. Entonces quería saber tu opinión sobre esto.
Solo un segundo. Es probable que el tercer congreso, si lo llegamos a realizar, el programa tenga una buena parte sobre el tema. I was saying that if we have the chance to do the third congress, okay. I feel that permaculture and everything will have more importance. Yeah.
We will see what we have for dinner. No, it's okay. Just a point. I've been working on that too, on a different approach, because cultivating your little patch of land, it's very nice, but I'm afraid 7 billion people cannot survive in that way. So we work with some friends of my colleagues with the idea of can we use electricity to power agriculture? With some people, FAO, they were interested in this idea. We did a study on this subject. If we even made an electric tractor, a real one, not a model, a tractor which can work. But the problem is always the same. I'm sure after you analyze the system, you can run an agriculture similar to ours, more efficient, hopefully, using electric power and not fossil fuel. But it is a little bit late, as Pedro was saying. Where is Pedro? Pedro was correctly saying, we don't have time. We have to change everything. We have to move society to a society which runs on electricity. And it's a fantastic task. We need a century, not a century, but 50 years. If we collapse, it will be much faster. So it's another of these questions. We have to also, going back to natural agriculture, is one part of this idea ahead. We go back to simpler technologies. We have these wonderful fertilizers and genetically engineered varieties, and everything is too much technology. It does a lot of damage because it's not sustainable. So it's another part where we have to shrink a lot.
Gail? And the last one. Yeah? That's okay. No, la siguiente, el tema.
Gail, please speak Castellano slowly.
I have a couple of observations. One is I've looked through limits to growth, and I've looked at the model. The thing that strikes me, and struck me years ago when I looked at it, is, it's an engineering model, and the way it needs to be fixed is it really needs this debt component. You need debt to get the fossil fuels out, and you need rising debt. And you can get the same trajectories going up as you do in the regular model, but you get a much different kind of a limit and a much steeper downslope. What the modeling did by doing it the way an engineer would do it is it kind of pasted on a Hubbard curve at the end instead of the overshoot and collapse that you would normally get, because it missed the point that you needed debt and that you needed growth to keep the debt going. So you have to have growth. You can't slow down, or you can't flatten out because you got to repay your debt with interest. So that's what it missed. So you can't really believe quite as much the downslopes, the way they put them in. The other thing that occurred to me is right now our problem is with inadequate demand, which is inadequate affordability. So cutting back in our demand helps create collapse quicker. And so, even though if we had done this 40 years ago, or back in 1972, we should have slowed down growth rate, but it depends on where you are in the curve. The right solution back then is not necessarily the solution now. Now you want everybody to go out and buy an SUV to keep it from collapsing altogether tomorrow.
Yeah, you're right, Gail. So a few questions. Let's see. The first one is the other side of the peak, which is correctly. It's part of the model. I tend to believe it because it makes sense in light of how these models work. You often, when the system gets complex, you don't have it symmetric. You have it going down faster, which is exactly what you see.
Seneca curve.
Seneca curve, yeah. But you are right that at some point now we can model growth, but it's more difficult to model collapse. We don't really know what's going to happen. The system may go in oscillation, may go chaotic. Right. Quite possible. It happens with the model. You play with the model. Some parameters make it chaotic, then you go up and it explodes, literally. So it's a good point, but once we start the downward slope, we will see how fast it will be. About the other point that you said that now the solutions, quotes, now are not the same as they were in 1972. It's quite correct. I can only say that think if people had listened to them, we would have now 2 billion people on this planet. Not 7 billion, but that was basically impossible. So now it's a different situation. But the people, the authors themselves, they say, look, ladies and gentlemen, our model works up to the point of collapse, then we don't know ourselves. So they've said it many times.
Por favor, no, es que nos estamos retrasando mucho y es la sesión vespertina. Como además conoces a Hugo de sobra, seguro que puedes intercambiar.
Doy las gracias porque sobre todo me gustan mucho los ponentes cuando me hacen reír, porque dentro de toda la tragedia que parece que nos rodea, pues es agradable reírse, y si es en conjunto, mejor.
You will excuse me, if you speak keeping the microphone like that, I have some problems. Maybe it's my Castellano, which is not good enough, but I sort of missed everything.
She likes the speakers that made her laugh.
Perdona.
And you are one of them.
Bien, lo siento. Que gracias porque es un placer escuchar a un conferenciante cuando te hace reír en los momentos en los que estamos, que a veces llega a ser una situación tensa y crítica, viendo un poco la decisión que a veces parece que nos ponéis de allí está la fila de los que quieren morir ya, vayan sacando los boletos, porque realmente parece que no hay solución para todos al ritmo que se están produciendo los acontecimientos. Quería preguntarte qué piensas, si tal vez para que el cambio realmente se produjera a una velocidad decisiva para llegar, si no sería bueno que juntáramos la técnica con la práctica y la pedagogía, que en este sentido creo que los ponentes sí que a lo mejor, aparte de los currículum que presentáis, que para la gente no académica o no técnica nos superan, pero a mí sí que me empezaría a gustar, que en algunos de vosotros sí que ya veo detalles, pero sí que me gustaría empezar a ver un poco el trasfondo de vuestras vidas, porque creo que es importantísimo que empecemos a dar el ejemplo desde la práctica, porque creo que es lo único que llega, ¿no? Y ya está.
Another one of those questions I can admire, but I cannot answer. This is the basic problem. Maybe I cannot show. I have a model for that too, but I will show it
not
to you.
now.
Not
Sorry.
But it's very nice. It's about the ECAT by Mr. Rossi. You know what is that? No, it's a wonderful.
If we start with this,
fusion machine which solve all our problems. Take a lot of time. Nobody knows about that. Later, I'll show you. You can use the same model to model the diffusion of concepts in society. It's an exceedingly interesting subject, but we cannot go into that now because I see that David is
ICAT is.
maybe
Yeah.
Then I show you it later.
Sure. Thank you very much, Hugo.